I once found myself in a cave, along with 8 or 9 other people. It was the middle of the Pennsylvania wilderness, and the only entrance was a small hole in the ground. To enter, you had to sit on your ass, grab a tree root, and drop about 7 feet down a steep wall to the floor. We all dropped in and spent at least half an hour exploring this cave. My friend Dan taps me on the shoulder and whispers, "Dude, look at the ceiling." The ceiling was just high enough above our heads to hide the thousands of spiders crawling around on it. We tried to keep quiet about it because we didn't want anyone to flip out, but there was no stopping it. Just seconds later, the whole group noticed them. Everyone got silent, and you could actually hear the spiders crawling on the surface of the stone. It was an extra nerve-wracking situation because the only way to exit the cave was to basically jump up and pull yourself out of a hole surrounded by spiders. 2 of the girls with us were terrified and refused to climb out. They just couldn't muster the courage to put their faces next to a giant spider nest. They came around though, and everyone got out safe. I had the honor of being the last one to exit, alone in a dark cave filled with spiders, and nobody around to give me a boost. Fortunately, Dan was brave enough to reach down in and give me a hand. When we first discovered that cave, we were all like, "I can't believe we've never heard of this place." Now I know why. That cave sucks. A few months later, I found out the cave is off limits in the fall because of the rattlesnakes. I was driving home through back roads I had never been on and came across a bookstore in a tiny town in the woods. The bookstore was actually a house where the front of the home had been converted into a store. There was a box on the porch that said 150 books. So I stopped to see if there were any Stephen King books in there. Middle-aged woman comes out with a huge smile and gives me a bowl of fruit and some tea. I'm like, this place is awesome, and rifle through books while eating the fruit and downing the tea. Inside the store home, there were a lot of cool art books and stuff, so I spent some more time in there. She brought me more tea. Even when I said, "No thank you, that's plenty," she kept refilling. Gave me dessert too, brownies and cookies. I didn't realize it at the time, but she was drugging me. It's hazy to remember the details, but at some point she closed the shop, telling me to take my time looking at the books. She told me that she was going to go take a shower and was gone for a while. When I was ready to pay, I had to wander back through her house to find her. I found her in her bedroom. She was in bed. I'm pretty sure she was naked. At the time, I thought, weird, she's watching an exercise video in bed, but later realized she was watching porn. You might think this is hot, but it isn't. She was my mom's age and had been telling me how she reminded me of her kids in college. So, not hot. I told her I was ready to pay, and she told me how to open the register, so I went and opened it, put in what I thought I owed, took out the change, and left. When I stumbled outside, a fire engine drove by, screaming with sirens. In the distance was the glow of a big forest fire, and the stars were being covered by smoke. A tall man on a horse watched the fire truck pass. He looked right at me, took a piece of wood or something out of his mouth, and said, "Town's burning." I swear to God I have a crystal clear memory of this happening, even though I'm sure it couldn't have. By this point, I guess I was seriously tripping balls on something. I'm not a drug guy, so I don't know what I had, but I was out of my mind and could hardly walk. I got back in my car and drove home along twisting roads on tall cliffs above the ocean. Twice I realized I was on the wrong side of the road. One of the times I realized this because a massive truck was headed straight for me, laying on the horn and flashing its lights. I kept thinking about how my car could be like an airplane and a submarine if I drove it off the cliff. I can't believe I made it home alive. Later, I realized I was in that house for about 4 hours looking at books. At least that's what I hoped to hell I was doing. I was in India for work, staying at a fairly nice hotel. I don't do this often. I usually like to head straight to the room and order room service while watching a movie. But I decided to have a drink at the lobby bar. I had a drink on my own, there was no one else around in the bar, and I made small talk with the bartender. I ordered another drink and decided to use the bathroom. I was gone a couple of minutes, and when I got back, I noticed that my drink, Scotch and Dry, had a cloudy white rim at the top, which isn't normally there. On closer inspection, the cloudy froth was settling into a powdery residue on the side of the glass. I asked the bartender what was wrong with the drink, and he at first acted like he didn't notice anything. I was suspicious now and kept at it until he acknowledged he saw something. I mean, it was obvious. There was this froth 2 to 3 millimeter around the glass. Then he said that it always happens and it's nothing. I then looked him directly in his eyes and asked, did he put anything in my drink? It's hard to explain, but his response, though it was no, told me everything I needed to know. So I made out like I was more curious than anything and asked him whether he would taste it. He said no and said he would pour me another. I declined and said I would drink it, but I just wanted him to tell me if it was off or not. All this while, there was this awkward vibe where we both knew the jig was up, but we were pretending like this wasn't happening. I paid up and left the drink where it was, locked and latched my door, the whole time picturing myself lying in a bath of ice sans organs. Okay, a couple of things you need to know first. When I was #2 years old, my parents and I lived in a house that my grandparents owned. Although only 2, I apparently could speak quite well in full sentences. My parents' bedroom was connected to mine through the closet, meaning you could walk into their closet, go through a door and back, and end up in the back of my closet. My mom started having these terrible nightmares. In her dream, she would wake up surrounded by fire. She'd rush through the closet to my room, scoop me up, and dive out the window. Suddenly, it would flash forward and her and my dad would be sitting in a waiting room at a hospital. A doctor would come in, looking somber, and say, "I'm sorry, but..." She'd wake up at that point, sweating profusely and her heart racing. One night, she woke up to me screaming. She ran into my room and pulled me into her arms, calming me down and asking me what was wrong. My response was, Mommy, my room was on fire, I was on fire." Of course, this freaked her the fuck out. I'm willing to admit that me having some sort of similar nightmare may have been caused by me overhearing a conversation about my mom's nightmares. But that's not the freaky part. Not too long after this, we moved out, though not because of the nightmares my mom was having. We lived in southern Illinois at the time, and my parents were having a hard time making enough money to support us living there, so we moved up to northern Illinois. My grandparents sold that house once we moved. About 6 months after we moved out, my mom was talking to my grandma on the phone. My grandma started telling my mom about how the house we used to live in had caught on fire. No one was home at the time, but the bedroom that had been mine had been completely destroyed. The fire had started because of an electrical short in the closet I spoke of before. This story always gives me chills when I tell it. Thank you for coming to Riotu's basement. Why don't you watch another one of our videos on screen now? Or even subscribe if you enjoyed.